Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Groovy podcast. My name is Ken Kousen, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and as always, I am joined by my good friend.
Baruch Sadogursky, podcasting from Sunnyvale, California.
And is it sunny in Sunnyvale, California today?
It is. It is. Looking out the window, it's pretty sunny. It's a good day. It's a good Friday. See,
Yes, we have
I'm a Friday outfit here.
yes,
Oh,
I see.
yep.
We actually are having a pretty good day in Connecticut as well. I don't think it's going to last very long. I think our temperature is going to be skyrocketing. But I will be traveling soon. I don't know about your travel schedule. Usually you're the one going all over the world. In the next few weeks, I've got OzCon. You're going to be at OzCon, right?
No. I'm going to be at Google Next. I think that's the name this year,
Hmm.
and it's pretty much the same dates.
Well, I'm only going to be at OzCon for a day, and it's mostly Android-related stuff with, oh, dare I say, Kotlin.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
obviously.
But then I go down to UberConf, which is the no fluff big destination event.
Nice,
And that'll be next week as well in Denver. And then the following week, in addition to some other stuff I'm doing, then that, of course, is the big week for GreatConf in Minneapolis, the U.S. version of GreatConf. Now, you're not going to be at GreatConf, right?
No, unfortunately, I won't. I won't be able to attend this year, but I expect a lot of fun, great stuff, good talks, good drinks, developer, the usual.
Well, I don't know if Dan Developers, I think he's going to be there, right? I haven't even looked at the calendar. I should look at the schedule to see what's going on there. That, of course, is at greatconf.us and all that. I did get my speaker stuff straightened out because I had one talk that I was supposed to be giving, and it was scheduled for time invalid, which was going to be kind of a hard one to deliver.
No, come on, you can do it.
Looks like I'm going to be doing two of them. I've got a custom ORM mapping talk. ORM mapping is one from the Department of Redundancy department,
Yeah.
object relational mapping. Any rate, so I'm doing a custom ORM mapping in Grails talk, so mapping to an existing database. And I've got a functional Java talk, which is actually comparing functional features in Java, Groovy, and of course Kotlin.
Kotlin, obviously. Yeah,
that's we
expect. Yeah, we expect no less from you those days.
Well, I did even say in the discussion that while the talk will try to be objective, the speaker has an obvious bias in favor of Groovy. So we'll see.
No, nice try. You think this declaration will help you somehow? Okay.
But there's a lot of great talks. There are a lot of good people that are going to be there. I mean, a lot of people we know. I see Colin Harrington, of course, Danny Hyun, and Eric Helgeson, of course, James Clay, Jeff, of course, Jeff Brown, Jeff Scott Brown listed here, of course. He's doing the 2-day Micronaut tutorial before the conference starts, as I recall. But he's going to talk about Gorm data services. I'm really looking forward to that. And then, again, there's a couple talks on Micronaut. And I believe, Kyle Boone's there. Who else? I'm just scrolling through Paul King is coming up all the way from down under, which will be wonderful. He'll give his Groovy update again.
Colin Harrington will be there.
Yeah, and Steve Pember and Tucker Pelletier and Zach, of course, Zach Klein will be there as well doing React stuff.
And Kyle Boone is going to be there. The usual gang. The usual gang.
Right. And of course I left out several. Andrew Reitz, of course, Wrights. I'm still pronouncing that wrong, I'm sure, after all this time. But he will be there as well. It should be a lot of fun. Those are our people,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm really bummed I won't be able to go. So this one conflicts with Google Next, and OSCON conflicts with something else. So yeah, unfortunately, I will have to skip, and I'm really bummed because I've been to I don't remember 4 of them in a row, and you know what? I do a lot of conferences in a year. This one is definitely my favorite.
Well, my hope is that I'll be able to round up some people who are there and that we'll be able to do a Groovy podcast from the conference. It'll depend on scheduling and who's there and when. But I am my own schedule has me flying in like Wednesday after I have a training class, and then I'll be leaving Saturday morning. So I do hope to have some time to see who's around. You know, I definitely want to talk to Paul, if nobody else. You know, lots of people, but certainly Paul.
Yeah, no, but Paul, if you remember, we still have to record his answer to the episode with Guillaume and Cedric that spoke about the gloomy future of Groovy in the face of no committers that want to take on the big challenges and all that. So we definitely want to hear Paul's opinion about it. That's very important.
Well, I had an interaction with Paul. I had to. I have been trying to switch to Java 10 these days. Okay. And the way my current system is set up, I use Java 8 frequently inside an IDE, but at the command line, I use Java 10. And that way I get to see the issues that come up. And what I had tried to do is I'd switched to Groovy 2.5.0 when that came out. That's been a couple months now. And I couldn't even start the Groovy console on 2.5.0. I was having all kinds of problems with Groovy in general. And of course, it was related to the fact that the JAX-B module is no longer included by default. It's considered part of the Java EE modules now, and therefore not part of the standard edition of Java. And while I more or less know how to fix that problem with a Java application, it's not obvious how to fix that with Groovy, you know? And I was, of course, trying to run with a Gradle build. Now, I have my old intro Groovy repository, the one that started off as the appendix in my Making Java Groovy book, and I've just been adding to and updating over the years. And I couldn't get anything to build in Groovy 2.5 on Java 10. On Java 8, everything ran without a problem. You know, it was just immediately no problem, and all the tests ran and everything. But in Java 10, I couldn't fix it, and no matter what I did, Stack Overflow, what have you, I couldn't get it to work. So I contacted Paul. You know, I emailed him, and he was trying to explain to me what the problem was, and I didn't quite understand it. And I also was talking to Ben Mushko, you know, formerly of Gradle, but still very active there.
Yep.
He gave me a version of a Gradle build file that seemed to work. It seemed to rely on a lot of internal APIs inside of Gradle, things that I don't really know and therefore never would have come up with. I mean, I did the wrong thing. I spent way too much time on it before asking for help, you know. But then when I went to Paul, he came up with a couple solutions, but he did the best thing of all from my point of view, is he said, I tell you what, let's make 2.5.1 and we'll take out the JAX-B requirement, basically. So he eventually did that, and 2.5.1 officially came out, what, yesterday, I think? I don't think it was this morning. I think it was yesterday. And I do have the link in the show notes to 2.5.1. And when I used his workarounds, and they allowed me to compile, run all the tests on my intro Groovy project. But when I switched to 2.5.1, I was able to take out everything else and just use that as I had before, and it worked like a charm. It was great. Now, that said, I still can't start a Groovy console or a Groovy shell on my Mac unless I set an environment variable to Java ops to add the module back in, the java.xml.bind module. If I set that, then I can start up the Groovy console, but I get all these errors related to, what's it called? MRJ? You're familiar with that? MRJ.
No. Are they errors or warnings?
It's a problem. It's an Apple library. It stands for, where is it? Whoops, sorry about that. Come on, give me a button to push. Yeah, all right. Apple is, it's an implementation of the Java virtual machine itself, and they've got their own library, so that when I go ahead and try to start up the Groovy console, when I set the Java ops variable, I can see it, but most of the menu items are gone, and there's problems because of that Mac OS runtime thing. And I mean, there is a jar file, and I know where it is on my system, but again, I'm not trying to add it to a build file. I'm trying to use an already built executable, the Groovy console. and I haven't been able to figure out how to add it to the class path on this already existing,
Oh my God.
version. So again, we got problems. Now I was able to start up the Groovy shell, so that's a good news. Now, of course, everything runs on Java 8. It's just, again, still these problems with Java 10. And I think it's an illustration of how few people have actually moved to Java 9 or 10, that I don't seem to find too many answers for this sort of stuff. I also am not sure whether Paul actually runs on a Mac or not, because he would have hit this right away. I suspect he uses Windows or something, or Linux perhaps.
Yeah,
Not sure.
and that's exactly what we spoke back then with Guillaume and Cedric, that we might not pay attention to it now because the community didn't really adapt the new versions, but as the adoption growth, what we have now is not ready. Even if eventually you are you are capable of doing stuff, it's so painful. There are so many hacks and workarounds. There are so many errors that you either need to ignore or not to ignore, that it should be solved before we can declare the future of Groovy on new Java versions safe and useful.
Just to highlight some of the frustrations. Oh, by the way, MRJ stands for Mac Runtime for Java. So, just
oh my God.
obviously,
Okay.
but whatever. But when I tried to, when I talked to Paul and to Ben, I kept mentioning, you realize that every time you do a Groovy build, or every time you do a Gradle build at all on Java 9 or 10, you get these horrible illegal access warnings. Okay. And that's the issue that we talked about with them earlier. When is that going to get fixed? And my sense, of course, is that the plan is to fix a lot of that stuff or deal with it for Groovy 3, which hopefully will be out by the end of the year, but we'll have to see. It depends on the level of funding and the people working on it and all of that. So it was frustrating, and it's still frustrating. I mean, I wasn't able to build at all until they made those changes. Now I can build through Gradle, and I can get most of what I need. But when I try to run the Groovy console, I got to remember, oh yeah, I got to set that environment variable. Now I suspect there'll be a 2.5.2, which will probably fix that pretty soon. Yep. But yeah, somebody's got to deal with this. Now, what surprises me is I don't think the Gradle people have been worrying about this to the level that they really ought to be. I mean, Gradle's in heavy competition with Maven and other tools. You would think that if you run on any Gradle build at all, whether it's got a Groovy dependency or not, any Gradle build at all now gives this warning, and they would be highly motivated to do something about it. Now, again, it's not from them; it's from Groovy.
Yep. Yep.
So
but but the solutions for that from a Gradle team can be different. They might say it only urges us to move away from Groovy faster.
Yeah. Now, Paul, of course, has pointed out that the reason you're getting these warnings, the reason that they are getting those illegal access problems as well, is that a lot of the reflection they're doing is for caching purposes, is to speed up Gradle, so that they would wind up having to slow it down considerably if they removed all that.
And if you remember that one of the solutions that it's the default solution that Cedric and Guillaume mentioned, that without the easiest way, and probably at the moment looks like the only feasible way, will be just removing all this caching.
Well, yeah, and the other thing I did, by the way, which was also frustrating me during this whole process, is Eclipse released its latest version. Eclipse Photon is out too.
Yep.
Eclipse has been on an annual release schedule practically since the first one. They just slip functionality and they maintain the schedule, which I think is wonderful. So I downloaded Eclipse Photon at the end of June. And I tried it on Java projects, and it works like a charm. And then I tried it on a Groovy project, and things seemed to work until I tried to use the Gradle plugin, and that collapses and destroys everything. And I just, it's just been hideous. I get errors all over the place. And I mean, you can't just say, well, nobody's using Eclipse anymore, because that's not true. The Groovy support in Eclipse is weak to say at best. At least somebody's working on it. But it's just frustrating, and if I do the Groovy projects and I don't go with the Gradle support, I generally am okay. But who knows? Now, of course, IntelliJ is better and all those things. Oh, did you notice, by the way, that what is it, NetBeans? What is it? 1.5 million lines of code were released to Apache. So
Yes.
that NetBeans is becoming an Apache project, right?
It's been accepted relatively long time ago. I think they are out of incubation now, or almost out of incubation now.
Yeah, it's a small community, but it's not an insignificant one. I mean, there are a fair number of people using it. Any rate, back to the Groovy stuff. That Paul did actually mention an interview, and you saw this on his Twitter feed. Paul did an interview with the InfoQ people.
Yep.
Right. And it's basically a summary of his discussions about the roadmap. So the interview is called Apache Releases Groovy 2.5 and Preview of 3.0.
Yes.
And it goes through a lot of those relevant features, Paul did quote, there's just the one quote that was here from the webinar that he did for OCI. The Groovy download numbers still make it the second most popular language on the JVM after Java, and the numbers keep increasing. There were 90 million downloads, etc. I know you are highly skeptical of download numbers as any kind of significant metric, but
especially for Groovy, which is used as a library.
Yeah, right. So, but at any rate, there is a nice summary, a nice discussion of all the things that are in 2.5 and coming up in 3.0, and certainly worth looking in the show notes for that.
It's a great interview.
Yeah, did a really good job. He also, by the way, did say apparently that Groovy 3.0 already supports JDK 11, which is a good thing, of course, because JDK 11 will be out in September,
and that's the long-term support version. So
yeah, exactly.
If we can kind of disregard a 9 and 10 and say or 10 and 11 and just say, what, let's forget about it. When version with long-term support is out, we kind of, it's expected from Groovy to support it.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of these things will be discussed at GreatConf. I certainly will be talking to people there, and I hate to bias any listeners on this with my own experience, because my experience may not be typical. It may be that there are plenty of other people who have different experiences with all this, but it does affect me, so I bring it up.
I think it actually it's very good that you shared it, because first of all, it aligns with what we spoke about and the problems that we kind of expect to have. So it actually makes a lot of sense. And now your conversation with Paul at GreatConf, the episode of this podcast will have much more essence when you actually know firsthand what you're talking about.
Well, so, and it's not going to be hostile in any way. I mean, it's going to be, Paul's still basically a personal hero of mine, so I do want to.
Mine, of course, too, and it shouldn't be hostile, but it should be very candid in terms of, okay, we see problems, I saw problems. What is the way forward?
We're really raising the bar here on Groovy 3. My expectations now are very much that Groovy 3 is going to solve all my problems and make everything work fine.
That's great. Yeah, that's exactly what we want.
So let's hope. Now, okay, other stuff going on. Paul, they did mention, I didn't put this, I put it in as a note in the show notes, that there was an alpha release of Groovy 3.0, as it's alpha 3 now, and there was an alpha release of 2.6 with the comment that that's it for 2.6. I mean, 2.6 was kind of a funny idea anyway. For those listeners who are not familiar, the idea behind 2.6 was that it was going to be as many of the 3.0 features as possible without requiring the Java 8 support. The problem is, of course, is that Java 8 is getting to be pretty seriously dated at this point, and trying to make things work on Java 7 seems like a bit much. And I think they've eventually decided that, nah, that's all right. We're just 2.6 is not really going to be a thing. We're going to go directly to 3.0, and that's what everybody will be expected to adopt. So at any rate, they did release an alpha version. I don't tend to play with alpha code, so I didn't look at it. But the fact that 3.0 has another release, another alpha release, it's good. Things are in motion there. Okay. We talked last time about the webinar that Paul King was going to do about the roadmap. And of course, he's giving a talk at GreatConf about it. Well, he posted his latest slides on Speaker Deck on that whole thing. So I put those in the show notes as well.
That's great.
Yeah. Now, regarding other stuff, it's been interesting in that there have been some things that we don't normally see that have been contributed. Have you ever used?
Yeah, I'm glad you collected such a bizarre list of tools and integrations. That makes it a little bit different and actually fun.
Have you ever heard of Apache Syncope?
No, I never heard about this project at all.
Yeah, well, Apache Syncope, if you look at it, let's see, I have the page open for this thing. Oh, here it is. It's described as an open source system for managing digital identities in enterprise environments, implemented in Java EE technology released under the Apache 2 license. But it does identity management, and they discuss all that, accounts and digital identities and everything. And the reason I bring it up, I mean, I don't personally know much about it, but the reason I brought it up is that they released a new version and they have specifically added Groovy customizations to it.
Yep.
So you can customize the behavior there. I don't know much about the product. I don't know what the user base is like, but it is an Apache project. It's obviously an active one, and hey, it's got some Groovy support, so good for that.
Yeah, and I think that the use case of customizations in Groovy, plugins in Groovy, whatever pieces of DSLs in Groovy is still the biggest driver for Groovy adoption. You use something like identity management for enterprise environments with Java EE, and that basically means that you never see or hear everything else except of this niche. Probably build with Maven and what's not. You will never heard about Groovy, and here suddenly there is something that you can play with and you can be exposed to. So those Groovy additions to tools which have nothing to do with Groovy otherwise are actually very, very good to see.
Well, so yeah, excellent. I'm glad that, I mean, that's a niche that Groovy will always be able to fill, and it's good that it's there.
Yep.
Now, one that's more relevant to normal Groovy coding is CodeNarc is still active. And CodeNarc, for those who don't use it much, is the code analysis, the static code analysis tool. It's a CodeNarc. Well, I went to codenarc.org or whatever, got redirected to the old SourceForge page, which shows you how old that thing is. But yeah, it basically lets you specify rules and analyze your code and determine what the quality is and things you might want to change. Pardon me. And at any rate, they recently released, what was the new version? 1.2, apparently.
Yeah.
So that's out as well. And in a period where, I mean, we don't do podcasts all that often, but still there weren't a whole lot of major releases during that time for us. And I thought I'd certainly mention that because I do know.
Yeah, so it's good to mention because static code analysis is important, and it's good to know that CodeNarc is still around and works. Their website is Maven generated like HTML page served out of SourceForge.
Right.
There's a lot of bad things about them, but they're actually not that bad.
Now, another one that was somewhat amusing to me, because again, I don't have any experience with it, but hey, it's good to see Groovy being used in places. Have you ever heard of, and this is called Telegrew?
Yep.
Apparently, it allows you to write bots in Groovy on Telegram. So they discuss that they have a little FAQ and everything. Says bots are third-party apps that run inside Telegram. Users can interact with bots by sending them messages, commands, inline requests. All the normal stuff. I was thinking this was some kind of Twitter bot, but apparently it's definitely for this product called Telegram. Have you ever used Telegram before?
Yeah, I'm a very heavy Telegram user. That's my primary messenger those days, and of course I use bots a lot and what's not. I had a lot of ideas for actually writing bots for Telegram, but there were all Python and JavaScript and what's not. So I'm kind of I'm not sure if I want to do it. But now having it and the Groovy library framework,
Yeah.
this is great. I definitely go and give them a try. It's
Okay.
very nice to see. I'm really happy.
Well, that sounds very promising then. Good. Okay. I didn't realize it was basically an IAM client, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. And another one that was a little unusual, or unusual to me anyway, is somebody basically wrote a little DSL in Groovy. They called it Graph DSL, which is, be careful with that one because, of course, you don't want to confuse it with GraphQL, you know,
Yeah.
whole separate thing. But Graph DSL is a DSL for creating and traversing actual graphs. And there's a link in there, and I saw this link, and in the Twitter feed, in the tweet, it actually showed a graph being animated. You could watch the little animation of visualizing the graph. So they have a script that lets you basically walk through it and traverse the graph breadth first, or label and color vertices as you go along, pre or post order, or whatever you like. And it looked kind of cute, you know. It's a neat app that I would not otherwise have stumbled across.
Yeah, and it is interesting because not so long ago, still I looked for a nice DSL for graphs, and I didn't find anything like
Hmm.
appealing much. And this one actually looks great because it's Groovy DSL, right?
Yeah, great. So, hey, any more use to put to that? Be my, enjoy. Hopefully that'll be very helpful.
Yep.
Speaking of graphs, I do have to mention it. It's a little out of order, but once 2.5.0 came out, as we noted on our last talk, uh, good old Mr. Haki, Hubert A. Klein-Icking, became
Hmm.
highly active again. And of course, that's wonderful because he writes short and sweet illustrations of how to use a variety of APIs, and that's wonderful. I got to fix a typo in there. But at any rate, the last four that I noticed, which are the ones that came after the ones I put in the last show notes, he wrote one on unmodifiable collections in Groovy, one on making tuples of up to 9 items, one on implementing interface and abstract methods automatically. Some of these things are well known, but also one on pre-order and post-order tree traversal. So back to graphs again, you know,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
using Groovy and all that. So anything that Mr. Haki writes is good. You know, we definitely want more people to be aware of that as much as possible. And I added them to the show notes there.
Yeah, this is great, and as I mentioned last time, it's one of the easiest, one of the most approachable ways to learn new stuff about Groovy.
Mm. Yeah, so definitely, and it's always good to see him contributing, in general. So there's that. Now, the one I skipped here was Guillaume Laforge did we talked about his blog post in the last podcast, I think, where he
Hmm.
was discussing machine learning,
Hmm.
because of course he
Yep.
works at
Yep.
Google now, and of course they're heavily into that. But he posted a new blog post called Putting a Groovy Twist on Cloud Vision, and it's basically the same stuff as as I see it, but it's right on the Google Cloud platform, so it'll get a lot of views, I'm expecting. It's called Google Cloud Big Data and Machine Learning Blog. So right on their main blog, he's retitled it as Putting a Groovy Twist on Cloud Vision, and he's listed as the cloud developer advocate and Apache Groovy PMC chair and everything. And again, the information is similar to what we saw in the earlier blog post, but I expect it to reach a much larger audience in this particular case, and that's got to be a good thing.
Obviously, yes, and that's as I mentioned last time. I'm really happy that Guillaume, even after he moved to Google, continued to be not only Google developer advocate but also Groovy developer advocate, and writes a lot of examples in Groovy, tries to write everything in Groovy, and does those activities which are not directly, I guess, part of his job as Google developer advocate, but obviously very appreciated because they popularize Groovy among those who might not be not know about all this stuff.
Right. And even if he's not as active on developing or working on the language directly, you know, Paul seems to have picked up most of the slack on that. It's still good to see him, you know, playing an advocate's role and still finding use cases, you know, to take
Yeah,
advantage of.
and his Groovy, his Google position helps amplifying that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Now, I didn't mention it, but of course, there's been a couple of Groovy calamaris that have come out, you know, from good old Sergio Delamo.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
he mentioned one on something called an @remember annotation, which somebody had written that says you specify a date in the future when you want to revisit the code. Interestingly enough, and after that date, the code will no longer compile, forcing you to reevaluate if the code's still required or find a more permanent solution. It's like, can you imagine setting a ticking time bomb for your own development? You know.
Oh, this is great. This is great.
You know, I saw, by the way, a recommended practice. I don't like using the term best practices because managers totally misinterpret that. They hear the word best and they take it literally. It's, you know, they use it as an alias for don't think. You know, it's like, if you do anything other than that, you're not best, quote. You know, so I don't use the term best practice. But I heard an interesting recommended practice once that said,
Hmm.
if you want to discourage your users from using an API, then I saw somebody put in basically a sleep command that had an
Yes.
increasing time period, so that every time somebody used it after a certain date, it would take longer and longer and longer to
Yes.
execute.
Yes. Yes. I think that was it was in one of the conference talks. For
Yeah.
some reason, I remember it has something to do with Google. But yeah, that's a great idea.
Now that one's not aimed at yourself, though. I mean, that's aimed at everybody else. This remember annotation looks like it's aimed directly at yourself. It's like, hey, you promised you were going to do this, like putting in a little reminder to yourself. But that was funny. Now, of course, they in the calamari they also mentioned a bunch of Microsoft, or not Microsoft. Oh boy,
Mhm.
how often am I going to do that? Micronaut related things. Now, about Micronaut, uh, from what I understand, of course, milestone 3, I think it is going to be released probably today.
Yeah, I think the last one which is out is Milestone 2. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, according to the Twitter feed and comments, and of course, Jeff Brown's been crisscrossing the country, if not the world. Jeff Scott Brown officially on Twitter, but Jeff Brown has been giving lots and lots of talks at user groups and everywhere about Micronaut and impressing people with what's coming with that. I personally still am reluctant to get involved in software that hasn't yet been released. I mean, I have
Mhm.
watched him give the talk. I mean, it's very impressive, you know, and it's very good. And they talk about doing a tiny little app and 10 megs of RAM and everything. And I'm like, okay, that's nice, but you know, what's it really do and what's really practical? And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of that information at GreatConf. I don't want to spend a lot of time on our podcast, though, talking about software that isn't even out yet. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, no, but I mean, I guess all those milestones are not designed to be used in production,
Mm.
for customer facing product. It is for what we make out of it. We play with it, we learn it, we get familiar with it. So once it's out, we will be able to very quickly pick it up and start using it seriously enough.
Well, and I'm sure that'll lead to discussions at the conference. Now, of course, in the calamari, what Sergio also reminded us is that Grails is still active and they are still writing those Grails guides. And I put a list of the most recent Grails guides, certainly the ones that have been out since our last podcast. One is on using Grails on Travis, the CI server there. One is Grails mock logging with SLF for J. And one is sending email with Spock and Spring. So that's all useful things. I think that's what I mean, again, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what the use case is going to be for Grails as opposed to Micronaut. And if Micronaut is obviously specifically targeted at microservice type applications, Grails is basically saying, look, you can do a little bit or you can do a lot. We have all these capabilities and plugins and everything available. What if you want to do sending email or running on CI or doing mock logging? I mean, they've got all these capabilities built into it. So we'll see. So at any rate, wanted to make sure that was publicized to some degree. That's inside the show notes as well. Now, I think that's pretty much everything I had, or everything. Now, our sources of information have gotten somewhat thin lately. I tend to, but at least let me mention one that I use a lot that we don't seem to have a link to in here is, of course, the Apache Groovy Twitter feed. You know, the
Yeah,
twitter.com.
so it's Apache Groovy Twitter feed and it's Groovy Calamari. Those are the main
Well, Groovy
ones.
Calamari we've mentioned frequently. The Grails Diary seems to have gone to sleep, I suppose. Probably not a big surprise. It's hard to maintain those things at a regular pace. But the Apache Groovy Twitter feed we don't tend to mention enough. And I do want. I'm not sure who manages that. Do you know who manages that?
I have no idea. I have to say,
I bet
I
it's
never
Andre
thought about
Salmiray,
it.
and he just
I really don't know.
I bet it's Andres Almiray. I bet he does because he does stuff like that, and you just never know, you know. But maybe not. I don't know. At any rate, thought we'd give him a shout out or give that a shout out. And we mentioned Andres last time because there was a Griffin release, but I didn't see anything Griffin related in the last couple of weeks, you know, to add to the show notes there. So if our major products that we talk about in the Groovy ecosystem, other than Groovy itself, are Grails and Gradle. And speaking
And
of Gradle, of course, Gradle is at 4.8.1 now, and 4.9 is on a milestone. So I would expect 4.9 to come out in the next week or so. I know they just released a milestone version, so maybe a couple of weeks. I don't. In principle, I could get insider information, and I go out of my way not to do that. Unless I have a problem. I don't want to violate any confidences or anything like that. So I ask them questions if I run into problems. But just the very fact that we talked about Gradle related issues on Java 10, and I have not gone in and said, hey, you know what? I've got access to their Slack channel. Let me start harassing people. I haven't done that yet either. I don't know who from Gradle is going to be at GreatConf, but if somebody's there, I'll talk to them.
I don't think I saw anyone
Well,
in
I
the
didn't see any Gradle related
speakers.
talks.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, which that's kind of odd, I suppose.
Well, they will definitely be at KotlinConf. That's for sure.
Well, that's a pretty telling statement right there. Are you going to KotlinConf, by the way?
Not that I know about. I don't think we're planned to go there at the moment, but I think maybe things will change. At the moment, no.
Yeah, I didn't submit anything because I didn't want to. Well, honestly, let me be honest about it. I didn't have anything to say. I didn't have
Me
anything
too. Me
profound.
too.
I
Exactly.
work with it because I do Android stuff. So of course I have to deal with it on the Android side, and of course I will eventually have to deal with the Gradle API. But again, it's a little early for that. But I didn't submit anything, and of course they're going to sell out. It's going to be very hot there. One thing I did hear from though, are you going to be at the conference formerly known as Java 1?
Yes.
Oracle
Yes. I
Code
have.
1, as they say now?
Yeah, Oracle Code One. Yes. So I have plenty of talks there. I will be there. Yes.
Well, I submitted like, I don't know, 4 or 5 proposals or whatever. I got an acceptance for one, and I
Mhm.
haven't heard anything from the others. So I will
So
be there.
from what I know, it was like a two-phase submission acceptances. There was like an early phase in which a limited number of talks, like the top talks on each and every track, were accepted. The ones that there was clearly the best ones to populate the content catalog that was open.
Mm.
And the second wave of submissions, I
Was yet
guess
to
we
be.
should hear about any minute now, because we submitted them to Oracle uh, about a week ago.
Well, I
S-
submitted. I mean, I did the foolish thing, not foolish necessarily, but the last day before the deadline, I put in like 4 talks, and then of course they extended the deadline a week.
yeah,
Which I knew they were going to do. I knew it, and
of
yet I
course.
put in the submissions anyway. So at least I had that done, and I have heard from one. And also, this is the first year that I'd be able to go to that Java Champion briefing or the Oracle Developer Champion
Yep,
briefing,
yep, yep.
whatever the heck those are. I still am not exactly sure. You know, um, I okay. Silly question. Since you seem to have some inside info on this, are they ever going to give out the Java Rockstar Awards from last year's conference, or is that
That I don't know. I remember we asked. I don't remember if we ever if we ever heard anything back.
because
Um,
I got into the habit of kind of hoping for that, and
yeah.
oh well, I won't worry about it. But I had a couple of really well received talks last year, and I was hoping that
So from what I know, the reason why they didn't do it for a couple of years was because the rating system didn't work. So they kind of didn't have the ratings to to kind of rage. But yeah, no, I didn't hear anything about that.
Well, I'm not going to worry about it. It should be weird, though, to see this year where it's not Java anymore, where it's Java plus lots of other stuff. Of course, all the talks I submitted were related to Java and or Groovy, although the one they accepted is the same one I'm doing basically at GreatConf, the functional Java with examples from Java, Groovy, and Kotlin,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
comparing them all, and we'll see what happens. So, of course, that's October. We have plenty of time to talk about that.
Yeah. So yeah, we need to wrap up because I have a hard stop.
But is there
About
anything
now.
else that anything else occurs to you? Anything that we didn't cover?
No,
You want to talk
I
about?
think that's a lot. We managed to find a lot of stuff to talk about out of thin air.
Well, then let
So
me give the shout out again to No Fluff Just Stuff for providing a web page that accesses everything. We have moved our show notes to the GitHub github.com/groovy-podcast team. The repo's called Groovy Podcast. If I remember, I'll put a link to the show notes in the discussion when the podcast goes up. Otherwise, I think that's everything.
yeah, I guess that's everything. Let's just check that the web page is up. It is, and the Groovy podcast show notes are available on GitHub. Okay, here we go. The link that we have on the homepage to the show notes is to the old one, so it won't have today's show notes.
Oh,
in
you
it.
mean the one on the No Fluff page?
Yes.
I will contact Ben and get that taken care
Yeah,
of.
I think we it was on our to-do list last time, and let's see if we can actually do it now.
Yeah, and of course I'll see him at UberConf next week too, so I'll definitely get that straightened out very soon.
So
Okay.
for our listeners that actually care and go to the web page and then try to navigate to the show notes from there, they're not there.
Yeah, I got to fix that. Okay. Then I will not see you at GreatConf, but I will try to do a podcast from there.
Yes. So please do. Next time you will hear from Ken live from GreatConf, and hopefully we will get an interview with Paul King and a couple of others. I personally look forward to be the listener on those. So thank you.
And then when we do our follow up in August, we can finally use Zoom instead of Google Hangouts.
Yeah, we will use Zoom. All the stream will remain the same. We will keep still streaming to YouTube.
Yeah.
So those of our listeners who love to see our faces live will have the opportunity to do that. I have to run.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ken, and
No problem.
talk to you soon.
You take care. Bye.
Bye bye.